Hi. A few days ago I stumbled upon an article about one of the famous gay penguin couples that were given an egg and raised it together as a happy family. You might have already heard about them. And even though gayness is still something that's not very positively looked at in a lot of countries, people are more and more understanding that it's actually quite a normal thing, in nature and in humans. But as a non-binary person, I asked myself, what about gender queerness? What about people being in between the both main sexes? Or on the other side of what their body was supposed to be? Research on gender versus biological sex is still very limited. However, while researching for this video, I fell into a rabbit hole about all the diversity in nature. A topic so extensive that it shows that nature was never intended to be binary. We were never intended to be binary. But let me show you what I mean by giving you a few examples of what I found. Do you know that fish? Well, I am sorry if this bursts your bubble, but clownfish are just one of over 500, if not even more, species of fish that are common to just very casually change their biological sex. In this case, a male turns into a female when there are none left. However, the reason why I wanted to talk about this particular fish is that clownfish changed their brain months before their body transitions, leaving them in this in-between stage of sexes for quite some time. But why is that so fascinating? Well, it shows that the brain and body aren't quite as much interconnected when it comes to gender versus biological sex. And we still don't quite know how it works for the rest of the ocean. But fish aren't very close to us, so what does that say except that nature isn't as binary as we think? Let's take a closer look at some mammals. Lions, for example, who are known to have very distinguished traits between the sexes. Male lions have big manes, big shoulders and deeper voices, while female lions are most times smaller, don't have that mane and most often a lighter growl. But did you know that there were actual sightings of female lions with a mane? To be completely correct, female lions that developed a mane, a deeper voice, and grew more like their classical male counterparts. Scientists are still unsure why, but it seems to have been sighted more than once. They were still able to give birth, but otherwise presented as their male counterparts. I'm asking myself, why did that happen? Did nature see a benefit into mixing the male and female traits? Was it an anomaly? We don't know that for sure, but it does show that it happens, and it is not as uncommon as we think. And while there are one-gendered species who basically clone themselves, and mushrooms who change everything about their sex, gender and reproductive system as they please, when they please, humans are still trying to just see the classical straight female and male story. But even in apes, in bonobos and chimpanzees who are very close relatives to us, queerness seems so normal and accepted. I mean, bonobos basically do funny business with every one of their peers. And there was at least one chimpanzee in captivity named Donna, who was born female but acted like a male and developed more and more features like a male. Donna even liked to hang out with their male peers a lot more, and was completely accepted by them. It would be fascinating if we could ask all those living beings which gender they identify as, and to be able to better see and understand how many of those non-binary traits are actually existing in wildlife. But I honestly think that nature doesn't really care about gender. These living beings probably wouldn't even understand what we're asking them, because they would just feel as themselves and are most times treated as such. So why should they even think about it? And why is it so different with us humans? Why can't we just accept so easily? These sightings all weren't singular. Queerness and diversity is all around us. And as normal as it is in nature, as normal it is in humans. There are females who grow beards, males who are smaller and softer than the so-called average, people who have just quite gender-balanced bodies. And I will not even start with people who have both female and male genitalia. And all of them have varying gender identities. And that is something that was reported already thousands of years ago, when nothing existed to explain to them what was happening. When there was nothing to be influenced by, because people who were experiencing something outside the male and female norm most times just went into hiding. And doesn't that alone already prove that it is a natural thing? An instinct? A feeling that we have? No? Then let me tell you another finding. Because even though there is still way too little evidence, way too little research, people did try to find out what is causing transness or gayness, and indirectly everything in between. So, over 20 years ago already, a few researchers were trying to find out if there is a difference between the brains of cisgendered, so people whose gender identity aligned with their biological sex, versus transgendered people, so people whose gender identity doesn't align with their biological sex. These were very small studies, but the findings were interesting nonetheless. They studied the already dead brains of cis males who were gay, cis females, trans women, and trans males. And what they found was that the parts of the brain that are involved in stress response, hormone regulation, sexual behavior, and gender identity had some significant differences. The INAH3 part, that is more responsible for sexual orientation, was different between cis males and cis females. However, the interesting thing about this part is that gay men and straight cis women were more similar to each other than gay men to straight men, as well as the other way around. Take this one with a grain of salt though, since it wasn't 100% consistent in later studies. And we just don't know enough about the rest of the brain and sexual orientation. It does show that there seem to be biological differences with sexual orientation though. The BSTC part of the brain, on the other hand, was quite interesting when it comes to gender identity. You can't see that in younger people, since that part is just too much in development then. But when grown up, it is generally bigger in cis males than in cis females. It is the same between cis males and cis males who are gay. But when they looked at transgender brains, this brain part matched more to the one of their felt gender, not the one of their body. So trans men matched more with cis men, and trans women with cis women. And that consistently, and as later studied, also without hormone treatment. These were still pretty small studies, and they are not suitable as a standalone diagnostic criteria. It does prove, however, that there is the possibility for a lot more brain and body combination types than just two. But regardless of just the brain, there are also so many forms of intersexuality that are not really talked about. And they reach from mild to very severe, with sometimes interlinked health conditions that are actually life-threatening. But oftentimes people just don't really notice anything about that. It can have something to do with your hormones, your chromosomes that are not always your typical XY and XX, or just receptors in your body that don't bind well to testosterone, for example. And this happens so often that it's not scientifically classified as a disease anymore, at least when it's not coming with any other health conditions. The thing that is classified as a disease, however, is the mental distress trans or non-binary people get from being treated badly, contrary to how they feel, or when they get gender dysphoria. However, this all is quite a big topic. And if you are interested in following up with more information, I got a lot of it from the book Evolution's Rainbow by Joan Roughgarden. It's honestly so interesting to read, and I can just recommend it. Non-binarity in nature is such a deep-rooted, complicated topic, but the more I read about it, the more it calms me, because the more it shows how normal it is to fall out of the ordinary, that there is no real ordinary, because nature doesn't care about that. It just grows and sees what sticks. And it seems that there is actually a lot of advantage in diversity when it comes to the survival of a species. I identify as non-binary. I just realized it when I was over 18, but it was part of me my whole life. It doesn't take up everything in my life. It is just one part of me. One part of my identity that is, however, having a really hard time getting accepted in the outside world. And it is one that finally felt normal to me when I knew what it was. A lot of things about me are weird, I know that. But that part of me is not. I can feel it in my core. So let's normalize being who we are. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I had a lot of fun working on it, and I will link some resources from actual researchers who did all the work I could base this video on down below. And keep being yourself, keep being awesome, and stay safe out there. Bang, bang, bang.